The ice in my whiskey had melted, watering down what was already mediocre scotch. The journalist sitting across from me waited patiently, recorder on the table between us. Its red light a constant reminder that some things, once said, couldn't be unsaid. "You understand that nothing I'm about to tell you is officially acknowledged," I said, my voice lower than the ambient drone of the bar. "The government will deny everything." "I'm prepared for that, Dr. Jones," the journalist replied, leaning forward slightly. "But if what you claimed in your email is true, people deserve to know." I stared at my diluted drink. 15 years of silence had been hard to bear. 15 years of nightmares, of wondering if I'd made the right choice by keeping quiet. But cancer has a way of clarifying priorities. When you're told you have months rather than years, secrets seem less worth keeping. "It started in February 2004, I began. I was working at DARPA, heading a research team on defensive countermeasures against self-replicating biological agents. Not the kind of work that makes for easy dinner conversation. The bar's dim lighting worked well for me. Washington bars like this one attracted government employees who wanted to stay out of the spotlight. No one noticed another middle-aged man with tired eyes trying to forget his secrets with alcohol. I was called to a meeting at the Pentagon. No explanation, just an order to report to a conference room in the D-Ring. When I arrived, there were two men waiting, a military officer and a State Department official. They asked about my expertise in neurological bioweapons, particularly those developed by the Soviets during the Cold War. I remembered how the fluorescent lights had buzzed overhead during that meeting. The air in the room felt stuffy and used up. They showed me satellite imagery of a remote Siberian village called Verkhoyansky, population 312, at least according to the last census before the Soviet collapse. But the images they showed me revealed something was wrong. Movement patterns that didn't make sense. A military helicopter down just outside the village perimeter. The journalist remained silent, waiting. They told me about Nerve Agent G, a Cold War relic the Soviets developed in the 1980s. Unlike conventional nerve agents, G was designed to consume neural tissue and transform victims into carriers. It was abandoned when Soviet scientists couldn't control its spread. I took a sip of my watered-down scotch, wishing it was stronger. The Russians had reached out to us, unusual in itself, especially during that political climate. They had lost contact with a reconnaissance team sent to investigate the village after satellites picked up thermal anomalies. They wanted American expertise, and I was apparently the best option available. I paused, remembering the moment my normal life had ended. I was given 48 hours to prepare. The next day, I met the rest of the team at Andrews Air Force Base. Dr. Elena Alvarez was waiting on the tarmac beside a C-17. She looked exactly like her file photo. Practical, short, dark hair, and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "Had you worked with her before?" the journalist asked. "No. She came from the CDC's Special Pathogens branch, had experience with Ebola outbreaks in Africa." I remembered our first conversation, how clinical she'd been when discussing potential fatality rates. Lieutenant Colonel James Reeves was in command of the military component, 12 Special Forces operators with biohazard response training. He made it immediately clear that the mission was containment first, investigation second. The bar had grown quieter as the evening progressed. A few patrons remained at scattered tables, none close enough to overhear. The flight to Russia was 18 hours of tension and briefings. We were supposed to be a joint operation with Russian forces, but nobody trusted anybody. Cold War habits die hard. I could still feel the vibration of the cargo plane, smell the hydraulic fluid and sweat. Alvarez pulled me aside halfway through the flight. She had more information than what I'd been told at the Pentagon. Agent G wasn't just designed to create hosts. It was meant to link them. A hive mind of infected carriers, directed by whoever controlled the master strain. "That sounds like science fiction," the journalist said. "So did Splitting the Atom once." The Soviets were thinking about biological warfare differently than we were. They wanted weapons that would leave infrastructure intact while eliminating resistance, population control rather than destruction. I looked down at my hands, surprised to find them steady after all these years. We landed at a military airfield near Yakutsk. Temperature was minus 30 Celsius. Russian officers greeted us stiffly and seriously. They transferred us to a helicopter, an Mi-8 modified for Arctic conditions. That's when we met Sergeant Kozlov, our Russian liaison. He was assigned to assist us, which everyone understood meant watch us. The memory of the helicopter ride remained sharp. The deafening rotor noise, the biting cold even though we wore thermal gear, and the tense silence between American and Russian personnel. As we approached Verkhoyansky, Reeves gathered us for final instructions. He was direct. We would establish a perimeter, assess the situation, and contain any biological threat. Lethal force was authorized against any compromised individuals who presented a transmission risk. I remembered Reeves's face in that moment. Not cruel, just practical in a way that made me more uneasy than the Siberian air. We approached after nightfall. Through night vision goggles, I saw Verkhoyansky for the first time. Just a cluster of buildings half buried in snow, some showing significant structural damage. No lights, no movement. The helicopter circled once before finding a clearing large enough to land. The journalist leaned closer, completely focused now. As we prepared for touchdown, Reeves came over to where Alvarez and I were checking our equipment. His face showed no emotion, and his eyes looked blank. I paused, hearing his voice as clearly as if he were standing beside me in the bar. "If either of you scientists shows any symptoms of exposure, I'll put you down myself," Reeves had said. "We can't risk this reaching the outside world." "Did you believe him?" the journalist asked. "I believed him completely," I replied. "And when we stepped out into that Siberian night, I was grateful someone was willing to make that call if necessary." I finished my diluted scotch, the memory of that first step onto the snow-covered ground still vivid 15 years later. But none of us understood what we were really walking into, not even Reeves. The helicopter set us down in a small clearing about half a kilometer from Verkhoyansky. The rotors kicked up a blizzard of snow that stung my exposed cheeks as I hunched forward, clutching my equipment bag against my chest. The noise of the engine wound down, replaced by deep silence. Reeves was first out, scanning our surroundings through night vision goggles. He signaled the all clear and we filed out into the Siberian night. The cold was intense and made it hard to breathe even though I wore layers of thermal gear. The temperature readout on my wrist showed minus 32 Celsius. "Move out," Reeves ordered. "Standard formation. Keep calm discipline." We trudged through knee-deep snow, our breathing creating ghost-like clouds that lingered in the still air. The moon hung low above the trees, illuminating the snowy landscape. Each step was labor, the snow sometimes giving way unexpectedly, sometimes crusted with ice that broke with an unsettling crack. Alvarez walked beside me. Her movements were efficient and purposeful. "You've done this before," I whispered. "Sierra Leone was hotter," she replied simply, not breaking stride. About 20 minutes into our approach, Specialist Wong raised her fist. She pointed ahead to a dark shape partially buried in snow, the downed helicopter. Reeves motioned to Harris and 2 other soldiers to secure the perimeter while we approached. The Russian Mi-8 helicopter lay on its side, rotors bent and shattered, the cockpit partially crushed from impact. No signs of fire damage. Kozlov moved forward, examining the markings on the fuselage. "This is reconnaissance team, sent 2 weeks ago. Pilot Kuznetsov, very experienced. Something must have happened." Reeves directed his flashlight into the cargo hold. It was empty, with no bodies and no equipment. "Blood here," Wong said, kneeling beside dark stains on the snow near the helicopter's side door. She pointed her light at a trail leading away from the wreckage toward the village. Significant volume. Multiple sources. The smears formed an uneven path, as if wounded survivors had dragged themselves, or been dragged, toward Verkhoyanski. Reeves studied the trail. We follow this in, maintain spacing. Daniels, Wong, rear security. Kozlov, you're with me. Doctors stay in the middle of the formation. We moved forward more cautiously now, following the blood trail that seemed impossibly preserved even though there had been continuous snowfall in this region. Alvarez noticed it too. The blood trail should be covered, she said quietly. Weather reports showed regular snowfall for the past 2 weeks. Maybe it's recent, I suggested. No, Kozlov interjected. This helicopter, it has emergency transponder. Signal stopped 14 days ago. That silenced us. We continued forward, the knowledge that we were tracking 2-week-old blood through pristine snow adding to our unease. Dawn broke slowly, the horizon changing from black to purple to pale blue. The growing light revealed Verkhoyanski ahead. Even from a distance, the destruction was evident. Several structures had been burned down to their foundations. Others showed significant structural damage. Walls collapsed and roofs caved in. Possible artillery damage, Harris murmured, surveying the scene through binoculars. No, Kozlov said. No military action authorized here. This is something else. As we reached the village outskirts, the first houses appeared damaged and jagged against the snow. We paused at the perimeter, taking in details that became more disturbing the longer we looked. Even with the fresh snow layer, there were no footprints anywhere. Not a single track from villagers, animals, or the missing reconnaissance team. This isn't right, I said. There should be tracks, paths between buildings at minimum. It's like the snow fell and nobody's moved since, Alvarez added. What we did find, cutting through the unblemished snow, were wide, continuous marks, as if heavy objects had been dragged through the village. All of these drag marks oriented toward the center of Verkhoyanski. Reeves assessed the situation quickly. We're splitting into 3 teams. Harris, take Wong and Daniels. Sweep the eastern sector. Jenkins, you're with Kozlov and Crawford on the west. I'll take the doctors and the rest through the center. Radio check every 5 minutes. Any contact with hostiles or civilians, you report immediately. The teams separated, moving between the damaged buildings with weapons ready. The silence was intense. No birds called, no wind stirred the branches of the few stunted trees, and nothing moved except us. The only sound was the crunch of our boots compressing snow. Our central team moved methodically toward the village square. Approaching a small administrative building, we found the first signs of the missing Russian soldiers. Equipment lay scattered across the snow. Standard issue gear, weapons, communications devices, and all abandoned. Organized withdrawal doesn't look like this, Reeves said, examining a perfectly functional rifle left behind. No brass casings, another soldier noted. No signs of firefight. Alvarez had moved slightly away from the group, kneeling beside what I initially thought was a dark patch of ice. She was already pulling on extra gloves and removing collection equipment from her pack. "Jones," she called. "You need to see this." I joined her, immediately recognizing what had caught her attention. The dark mass frozen to the ground wasn't ice. It was organic matter, tissue that had partially liquefied and then refrozen. Alvarez carefully collected samples, placing them in specially designed containment vials. This is consistent with Agent G exposure. The compound breaks down cellular structures, particularly in neural tissue, before reconstituting them into a modified form. Human? I asked. Yes. Based on the cellular degradation pattern, I'd estimate exposure occurred roughly 2 weeks ago, aligning with the helicopter crash. Reeves had been listening. He activated his radio. "All teams, be advised. We have confirmation of Agent G exposure. Switch to level 4 containment protocols. Full face masks, no exposed skin." The radio crackled. "Central, this is West Team. Jenkins has found something in the comms building. You should see this." We regrouped at a squat concrete structure that must have housed the village's communications equipment. Jenkins met us outside, his expression troubled behind his clear mask. "It's on the walls, the ceiling. Nothing I've ever seen before." Inside, illuminated by our flashlights, a network of filaments covered the interior surfaces. They weren't mechanical wires. They were organic, resembling nerve fibers or blood vessels. They pulsated slightly, a rhythmic movement that suggested circulation or signal transmission. The fibers all connected, forming a complex network that converged toward a central point on the back wall. "Don't touch anything," Alvarez warned. Jenkins pointed to a collection of communication equipment. These were still running when we entered. Batteries should have died days ago. I think these fibers are drawing power somehow." The implications were chilling. Agent G was designed to rewrite neural pathways, to connect infected hosts. What we were seeing was that process extended beyond bodies to the infrastructure itself. "Seal it," Reeves ordered. "Nobody goes back in. Mark it for the containment team." As Jenkins and another soldier began sealing the building with specialized tape and markers from their packs, Reeves gathered the team leaders to discuss our findings. "This isn't a simple outbreak," I said. "Agent G has established itself throughout the village. The missing people, the drag marks, I believe they've been collected." "Collected for what purpose?" Reeves asked. Before I could theorize, a sound cut through the silence. A wail, not quite human, not quite animal, traveled across the village. It rose and fell in a pattern that suggested multiple sources producing a unified sound. Every head turned toward the source. At the center of the village stood a large wooden structure. The Orthodox Church, its onion dome still intact even though everything around it was destroyed. Kozlov crossed himself reflexively. "That is Church of St. Nicholas, village gathering place." As we watched, the heavy wooden doors of the church visibly bulged outward, as if something massive inside was pressing against them, testing their strength. The wailing intensified, becoming more desperate, more hungry. "Whatever's happened to the villagers," Alvarez said quietly, "I think we've found them." The wailing rose to an unbearable pitch as we approached the church. Each step closer intensified the sound until it vibrated through my bones and set my teeth on edge. What had started as a mournful cry had transformed into something hungry and desperate, a collective voice that shouldn't exist. Reeves halted us about 30 meters from the Orthodox Church's entrance. The wooden doors continued to bulge outward with rhythmic pulses. "Alvarez, Jones, you stay back," Reeves ordered. "Kozlov, what's the layout inside?" Kozlov's face had gone pale beneath his mask. "Simple. One main worship area. Small rooms in the back and a bell tower above." Reeves nodded, then motioned to his remaining soldiers. They moved with practiced precision, stacking up beside the entrance while we watched from behind a partially collapsed wall. My breath fogged the inside of my mask in rapid bursts. "On my mark," Reeves said into his comm. 3, 2, 1, breach." Harris kicked the doors open while 2 soldiers tossed in flashbang grenades. The deafening crack was followed by a momentary silence, then a sound I still hear in my nightmares. Thousands of voices screaming in perfect unison. The soldiers moved in, weapons raised. I couldn't see what they discovered, but their reactions told me everything. Wong stumbled backward. Jenkins vomited inside his mask. Harris simply froze with his weapon half lowered. "Jesus Christ," Reeves whispered over the comm. Against all training and common sense, I moved forward. Alvarez grabbed my arm, but I shook her off. I had to see, and I had to understand. Nothing could have prepared me for what waited inside that church. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, of human bodies had fused together into a single, massive organism that filled the entire interior space. Limbs protruded at impossible angles, some elongated to twice their normal length. Faces emerged from the undulating flesh mass, some screaming, some silent, with eyes that followed us. Torsos melded together in disgusting formations, skin stretched between bodies like webbing. The creature pulsed with hideous life, circulating fluids visible through semi-transparent tissue. At its core, where the altar should have been, a dense cluster of partially dissolved heads created a central node, their eyes moving in coordinated patterns that suggested a collective intelligence. "The golem," Alvarez whispered, having followed me to the entrance. "Agent G has connected them into a unified organism." "Everyone out!" Reeves shouted. "Fall back now!" But it was too late. The mass moved with frightening speed. A limb, once human but now elongated and boneless, shot across the space and wrapped around Private Daniel's leg. He fired his weapon instinctively, bullets tearing into the appendage without effect. The creature pulled with impossible strength, dragging him toward the central mass. "Help me!" Daniel screamed, clawing at the floor. Harris and Jenkins grabbed his arms, trying to pull him back, but 3 more tendrils lashed out, wrapping around Daniel's torso. His body lifted off the ground, suspended between his comrades and the golem. "Let him go," Reeves ordered, opening fire on the tendrils. The bullets tore through flesh but sealed behind their passage, the tissue regenerating almost instantly. Daniel's screams reached a crescendo as he was pulled from his comrade's grasp and into the central mass. His body began to dissolve on contact, uniform, and equipment melting away, his features distorting as he was absorbed into the collective. "Fall back!" Reeves shouted again. More tendrils shot out, faster than anyone could react. 3 more soldiers were caught: Crawford, Peterson, and Martinez. They fired wildly as they were dragged across the floor toward the mass, their screams joining the cacophony. Harris reached for his belt, pulling an incendiary grenade. "Cover!" he yelled, yanking the pin. We ducked outside as he tossed the grenade into the center of the mass. The blast shook the building, and a wave of heat rushed through the doorway. The unified scream that followed shattered every window in the church, raining colored glass down upon us. When I looked up, the creature was burning, but still moving. It heaved its massive bulk through the rear wall of the church, brick and timber giving way as it forced its amorphous body through the opening. It dragged itself with surprising speed toward the tree line, leaving behind pieces of burning flesh that continued to move independently for several seconds before stilling. "Status report," Reeves called out, his voice steady even after what we'd witnessed. "4 men down," Wong replied, her usual calm faltering. "Daniels, Crawford, Peterson, Martinez." Kozlov crossed himself, murmuring what sounded like a prayer in Russian. I moved to the pool of fluid where the creature had been. Even though revulsion churned my stomach, I knelt and removed a collection vial from my pack. "Don't touch it directly," Alvarez warned, joining me with her own sampling kit. The liquid glistened with an oily iridescence, strands of tissue floating within it. As I collected a sample, I noticed how it seemed to reach toward the collection wand, responding to proximity like a primitive organism seeking contact. "It's still active," I said. "The Agent G is trying to connect." Alvarez nodded, sealing her samples. "This confirms everything. Agent G doesn't just infect, it networks its hosts into a unified system. The golem isn't a random mutation. It's exactly what the Soviets designed the agent to do." Reeves had joined us, his face grim behind his mask. "Can we kill it?" "Fire seems effective against smaller portions," Alvarez replied. "But the main mass appears capable of abandoning damaged sections and preserving the core intelligence. We need to track it," I said. "Where it's going might tell us more about what it wants." Reeves nodded. "Harris, Wong, secure the perimeter. Jenkins, get the remaining gear. We're moving out in 3 minutes." Outside, the thing had left an obvious trail, dissolved snow, and a path of fluid that killed vegetation on contact. We followed at a cautious distance, weapons ready. The trail led through the dense pine forest, winding between trees too narrow for the creature to have passed through intact. "It's changing shape," Alvarez observed, "adapting to its environment." After nearly a kilometer, the forest opened into a small clearing. The snow had melted in a perfect circle approximately 30 meters in diameter. In the center stood a concrete structure, an entrance to what appeared to be an underground bunker. Its heavy metal door hung askew, partially open. Fresh drag marks led inside. Soviet-era installation, Kozlov said quietly. Not on any maps, I know. Reeves surveyed our diminished team, 7 soldiers remaining, plus Alvarez, Kozlov, and myself. He activated his satellite communication device. Command, this is Reaper 6. We have confirmation of Agent G deployment resulting in Stage 4 contamination. 4 personnel lost. Target has retreated to an unmarked subterranean facility at coordinates Lima 73902. Request immediate extraction and containment team. The reply came through with significant static. Reaper 6, acknowledge your situation. Extraction assets are 6 hours out minimum. You are ordered to pursue and neutralize the threat by any means necessary. Prevent spread at all costs. Command out. Reeves looked at the bunker entrance, then back at what remained of his team. His expression didn't change, but I saw something in his eyes. Not fear, but the weight of responsibility. You heard them, he said finally. We're going in. I stared at the dark opening. Whatever waited below had already consumed an entire village and 4 highly trained soldiers. I tried to remind myself I was a scientist, that understanding this phenomenon was worth the risk. But as we approached the bunker entrance, all I could think about was Daniels's face as it dissolved into the mass, still conscious, still screaming. The bunker entrance stood before us, framed by rusted metal. Dusk made the clearing look dark. With each step closer, the temperature seemed to drop, though whether from actual cold or my growing dread, I couldn't say. Movement protocol, Reeves said, his voice low but carrying clear authority. Single file, 3-meter spacing. Wong, point. Kozlov after her for translation. I want no surprises. Jenkins distributed emergency light sticks, which gave off a sickly green light. We activated our mask-mounted lights as well, which lit up the darkness ahead. The corroded metal stairs led down at a steep angle, each step groaning beneath our weight. The air changed immediately. It smelled metallic with an underlying sweetness that reminded me of rotting fruit. My training told me to analyze these sensations objectively, but instinct told me something was wrong. 20 steps down, motion sensors detected our presence. Ancient fluorescent lights flickered to life, struggling against decades of neglect. Several burst from the sudden surge, showering sparks onto the concrete floor. Kozlov stopped abruptly, staring at a large red sign mounted on the wall. Cyrillic letters, faded but still legible, covered its surface above a biohazard symbol. What does it say? Reeves asked, tension evident in his voice. Bioweapon Research Facility 16, Kozlov translated, his expression hardening. Authorized personnel only. Genetic Engineering Division. He turned to us, his face partially obscured by his mask, but his eyes revealing genuine fear. This was not on any military maps I know. Even KGB archives do not mention this place. They wouldn't, I said. Agent G was probably developed outside official channels. Even in the Soviet system, some projects were too dangerous for proper documentation. We continued deeper, entering a wide corridor lined with laboratory doors. Many stood ajar, revealing glimpses of abandoned workstations and specialized equipment. Everything had the practical design of late Soviet science, functional, sturdy, and with no concern for looks. Spread out, Reeves ordered. Teams of 2, secure and catalog, 10 minutes only. Alvarez motioned for me to join her in examining the first laboratory. Inside, the devastation was immediate and telling. Glass containment equipment shattered, documentation scattered across the floor, dried chemical stains marking the walls in patterns suggesting violent chemical reactions. This wasn't abandoned in an orderly fashion, she noted, kneeling to examine a broken centrifuge. They left in a hurry, or they didn't leave at all. I moved to a partially intact file cabinet, its top drawer hanging open. Inside, I found several leather-bound journals, their pages filled with handwritten notes in Russian, diagrams, and chemical formulations. Though I couldn't read the text, The molecular structures were recognizable to anyone with advanced biochemistry training. "These are Agent G research journals," I said, carefully placing them in my pack. "The base formulation appears to be derived from nerve agents, but with radical modifications to the delivery mechanism." Alvarez had moved deeper into the lab, her light illuminating what appeared to be an observation chamber separated by thick glass. Inside stood 6 metal beds, each equipped with heavy restraints. "Test subjects," she said quietly. "Human test subjects." The restraints were broken, torn from their moorings with force that would have required superhuman strength. Dark stains covered the beds and walls, patterns suggesting violent struggles. "This isn't just a research facility," I realized, connecting the evidence. "It's where they developed and tested Agent G on human subjects." "Which means the golem wasn't the first," Alvarez concluded. "They created others here, earlier versions." Reeves appeared at the doorway. "We've found something. Next section." We followed him through a security checkpoint with a reinforced door hanging from one hinge. Beyond lay a wing labeled Observation in both Russian and English. This area contained dozens of cells, each with a viewing window and monitoring equipment. Most doors stood open, but the few that remained closed bore scratch marks on their interior surfaces, long, deep gouges in metal that should have been impossible for human hands to create. "They were keeping them here," I said, observing the progression of infection. Jenkins called from further down the corridor. "Sir, you need to see this." He stood before a large window overlooking a circular chamber 1 level below us. The room appeared to be a communal area, perhaps for more socially advanced experiments. The walls and floor were covered in the same organic filaments we'd seen in the church, which pulsed with subtle rhythm. "It's spreading," Wong observed. "The Agent G is integrating with the facility itself." Before anyone could respond, a sound traveled through the corridors, scraping, shuffling footsteps approaching from multiple directions. Reeves signaled for silence, directing us into defensive positions with practiced hand motions. They emerged from connecting corridors and maintenance shafts, human figures moving with unnatural coordination. Unlike the fused mass of the golem, these were individual bodies, yet clearly altered by Agent G. Their skin had a waxy, translucent quality, blue veins visible beneath the surface. Their movements were jerky but purposeful, heads tilting in perfect unison as they spotted us. "Infected villagers," Alvarez whispered, "and possibly the Russian reconnaissance team." I counted at least 15 approaching from various directions. Their eyes tracked us with an intelligence that seemed collective rather than individual. When one tilted its head to observe us, all others mimicked the action precisely. "They're networked," I said. "Independent bodies sharing a unified consciousness." "Can we neutralize them?" Reeves asked, weapon raised. Before Alvarez could answer, the infected launched their attack. Not with wild aggression, but with disturbing coordination. They moved in formations, some advancing directly while others circled to flank us. Their tactics suggested military training, or at least access to such knowledge. "Open fire!" Reeves ordered. The soldiers' weapons sounded in the confined space. The infected in front collapsed under sustained fire, but those behind simply stepped over fallen bodies, maintaining their advance without hesitation. Most disturbing was their lack of defensive instinct. They made no attempt to take cover or avoid bullets. "They're not trying to kill us," Reeves realized after several minutes of engagement. "They're trying to overwhelm us, capture us." He was right. The infected that reached our position attempted to grab rather than harm us. When Harris shot one directly through the chest, it continued forward, arms outstretched, until a headshot finally stopped it. "Central nervous system destruction only," Harris called out, adjusting his aim. We established a defensive perimeter in an intersection of corridors, using overturned metal tables as barricades. I took the opportunity to examine a facility map mounted on the wall nearby, its plastic surface cracked but still legible. "There's a main storage vault 2 levels below us," I reported, tracing the layout with my finger. It's connected to this level by a freight elevator at the end of this corridor. That's where it went, Alvarez said, reloading her sidearm. The golem. It's seeking something in that vault. Then that's where we're going, Reeves decided. Wong, Jenkins, clear a path to the elevator. Everyone else covering fire. 5-second intervals, leapfrog pattern. We moved as instructed, 2 soldiers advancing while others provided cover, then rotating positions. The infected continued their coordinated assault, seeming to anticipate our tactics, adjusting their own approaches accordingly. They're learning, I told Reeves as we paused behind a barricade, adapting to our methods. Then we changed the pattern, he responded. Harris, Wong, ceiling check. The warning came too late. As Harris looked up, infected dropped from access panels above, having used maintenance crawl spaces to position themselves. One landed directly on Harris, its elongated fingers wrapping around his exposed wrist, where his glove had separated from his sleeve during combat. Contact! Harris shouted, struggling to push the creature away. Wong was beside him instantly, her combat knife slashing through the infected's throat. She pulled Harris free, but we all saw it. The blue discoloration spreading up Harris's arm from the point of contact, veins visibly darkening as the agent entered his bloodstream. I'm hit, Harris said calmly, staring at his arm. The infection progressed with horrifying speed, blue lines racing toward his shoulder. Keep moving, Reeves ordered, but his eyes met Harris's with understanding passing between them. We fought our way to the elevator, a massive freight platform designed to transport heavy equipment. Jenkins activated the controls while the rest of us held the infected at bay. As the doors began to close, Harris stepped back, remaining in the corridor. Harris, move your ass, Reeves shouted. Can't do that, sir, Harris replied, his voice eerily steady despite the blue veins now visible on his neck. You know the protocol for exposure. Reeves hesitated, an emotion I couldn't identify briefly crossing his face. Sergeant, I'll hold them off, Harris interrupted. Complete the mission. He looked at each of us, his eyes still his own despite the infection visibly climbing his face. It's been an honor. Wong tried to reach for him, but Jenkins held her back as the doors continued closing. Give me your sidearm, sir, Harris said to Reeves. Reeves drew his pistol and passed it through the narrowing gap without hesitation. Godspeed, Sergeant, he said softly. As the elevator doors sealed shut and we began our descent, a single gunshot sounded through the shaft, the noise bouncing off metal walls before fading into silence. Wong stared at the closed doors, her normally composed expression cracked with grief. No one spoke. There was nothing to say. The elevator continued its descent for what felt like minutes, but was likely only 30 seconds. When it finally stopped, the doors opened to reveal Level 3, a vast circular chamber that looked like something from a science fiction film rather than Soviet-era construction. Hundreds of fluid-filled containment tubes lined the walls from floor to ceiling, each connected to a central hub by pulsing organic filaments similar to those we'd seen throughout the facility. Most tubes contained a blue luminescent liquid, while others had shattered, their contents either evaporated or pooled on the floor. The room was lit by a blue glow from the intact containers, creating dancing shadows that moved even when we stood still. At the center of the chamber stood a single figure, a man in a Soviet military uniform that appeared decades old, yet perfectly preserved. His skin was almost transparent, blue veins visible throughout his body, pulsing with the same luminescence as the containment tubes. He stood perfectly still, watching us with eyes that glowed from within. "Welcome, Americans," he said, his voice resonating with unnatural harmonics that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "I've been waiting for someone worthy of witnessing what we've created here." The man smiled, revealing teeth that glowed the same unnatural blue as his veins. Something about his confidence, his complete lack of fear despite facing armed soldiers, chilled me more than any horror we'd encountered thus far. "Who are you?" Reeves demanded, weapon raised. someone who has transcended your limited understanding of human potential, the figure replied. But you may call me Colonel Baranov. I once commanded this facility, before I became something more. The man smiled with unnatural calmness. Every movement he made, even the slightest tilt of his head, sent ripples through the organic filaments connecting him to the room. It looked scary, like he somehow controlled the entire chamber. My American counterparts, he said, his perfect English carrying a musical Russian accent. I've waited decades for an audience worthy of witnessing what we've achieved here. Identify yourself, Reeves commanded, his weapon trained squarely on the figure's head. Colonel Mikhail Baranov, former Soviet Army, lead scientist on Project Golem. Though former feels inappropriate now. The Soviet Union collapsed, but I went beyond it. He looked at us with glowing blue eyes that seemed to see through rather than at us. You've come seeking Agent G. How disappointing that your government sent so few to retrieve something so precious. I forced my voice to remain steady. We're not here to retrieve anything, we're investigating an outbreak. An outbreak? Baranov's laugh rang unnaturally. Such a clinical term for evolutionary advancement. Your language betrays your limited perception. What happened here? Alvarez asked, her scientific curiosity momentarily overriding her fear. Baranov moved toward us with a fluid grace that defied natural human movement. Each soldier tensed, fingers tightening on triggers, but Reeves signaled them to hold. The Soviet Union was crumbling around us in 1989. Decades of research, billions in resources, all to be abandoned or worse, surrendered to the West. Baranov's face contorted briefly with remembered rage. I couldn't allow that. Agent G was too important, too revolutionary to become another American weapon. So you preserved it, I said, the horrible truth dawning on me. Better. His smile widened. I became it. The perfect symbiosis of creator and creation. He gestured to the containment tubes surrounding us. I injected myself with the master strain and entered cryostasis. The facility was sealed, all records purged. I slept while my body changed, while Agent G rewrote my cellular structure and neural pathways. Until the Russian reconnaissance team woke you, Reeves noted. An unfortunate surprise for them, yes. Simple soldiers following orders, checking abandoned Cold War facilities. They couldn't comprehend what they found. Baranov's expression softened with false sympathy. Their confusion was regrettable but necessary for my adaptation to this new era. I stared at the pulsing filaments connecting Baranov to the chamber, following their path to the dozens of containment tubes and back to his body. Each pulse sent a wave of blue luminescence through the network, moving with steady, rhythmic beats. "You're the central nervous system," I whispered as I suddenly understood. "The golem, the infected villagers, you're controlling all of them. Control implies domination. I prefer guidance." Baranov spread his arms. "I share my consciousness with them. They become extensions of me, and I of them. A unified mind spread across multiple bodies." The implications were huge. Agent G hadn't just created infected hosts. It had created a distributed consciousness with Baranov at its center. Every infected person, every changed villager or soldier, wasn't just connected to Baranov. They were Baranov, extensions of his will. "You deliberately infected the village," Alvarez realized aloud. "I needed to understand modern humans. Things have changed in 15 years. Baranov stepped closer, his movements eerily smooth. But the fundamentals remain the same. Humanity still lives divided, fighting meaningless battles over arbitrary boundaries. I've solved that problem. No more nations, no more wars. One mind, one purpose." Wong moved her position slightly to cover Alvarez. Baranov's glowing eyes flicked to her, his head tilting with predatory interest. "You disapprove, Specialist Wong." He spoke her name with intimate knowledge that chilled my blood. "I can feel your resistance from here. Your mind is disciplined, focused. and sharp. You would make an excellent addition to our collective. Stay back, Wong warned, raising her weapon. Baranov smiled. Your friend Harris is already joining us. His resistance was admirable but ultimately futile. Even now, his knowledge and training integrate with our consciousness. The mention of Harris's name sent a visible shock through the team. Reeves's jaw tightened, but his aim never wavered. That's enough, he said. You're coming with us for containment and study. Baranov's expression changed to something between amusement and pity. Americans, always believing they can control what they don't understand. What happened next occurred too quickly for human reaction. Baranov moved with impossible speed. One moment standing 3 meters away, the next directly beside Wong. His elongated fingers wrapped around her head before she could fire a single shot. A quick, efficient twist. The crack of her neck breaking resounded through the chamber. Wong's body crumpled to the floor as Baranov stepped back, moving so fast he seemed to blur. Open fire! Reeves shouted. The room erupted with gunfire. Bullets tore through Baranov, but his body rippled like water with each impact, the wounds sealing instantly. Blue fluid sprayed out and then flowed back into him. He wasn't dodging. He was phase-changing, his molecular structure temporarily dispersing and then reforming. The tubes, Alvarez shouted, pointing to the containment vessels. They're full of concentrated Agent G. That's his power source, his connection to the network. Baranov's expression hardened. He lunged toward Jenkins, moving so fast he appeared to teleport. Jenkins emptied his magazine but couldn't stop Baranov's attack. The colonel's hand plunged into Jenkins's chest, blue veins immediately spreading through his body. Jenkins screamed as his skin began changing, becoming translucent, his veins glowing with the same blue luminescence as Baranov's. "Target the containers!" Reeves ordered, redirecting fire toward the glass tubes lining the walls. Bullets shattered several containers, releasing pressurized blue fluid that ignited on contact with air. The flames burned with an unnatural blue intensity, consuming organic filaments and sending Baranov staggering backward. "Yes," Alvarez shouted. "The agent is flammable in concentrated form." Baranov roared, a sound that contained multitudes of voices, as if the entire golem screamed through him. He gestured sharply, and more infected appeared from adjoining corridors, moving with the same coordinated precision we'd seen earlier. "You cannot stop evolution," Baranov said, his voice deepening as more Agent G leaked into the chamber. Instead of avoiding the fluid, he absorbed it through his skin, growing visibly stronger. His body began to change, limbs elongating, fingers extending into blade-like appendages. 2 more soldiers fell, overwhelmed by infected villagers while trying to destroy the containment tubes. Alvarez moved to help Crawford, only to be thrown against a wall by Baranov's elongated arm. She collapsed, blood seeping through her protective suit at the shoulder. "Alvarez!" I shouted, rushing to her side. "I'm all right," she gasped, though clearly she wasn't. "The containers. We need to destroy the central hub. Everything connects there." I helped her to a defensive position behind an overturned console as Reeves and Kozlov provided covering fire. The chamber was changing around us, the released Agent G merging with Baranov, enhancing his abilities. He moved faster, hit harder, his body becoming less human with each passing second. "There are too many containers to shoot individually," Reeves shouted over the gunfire. "We need something bigger." Kozlov checked his ammunition, then his pack. His expression changed as he realized something, a grim determination settling over his features. He caught my eye from across the chamber, and I saw his decision before he voiced it. "Dr. Jones," he called. "Tell my daughter I did not die for nothing, yes?" "Kozlov, what are you—" He was already removing the charges from his backpack, the same thermite explosives we'd brought to ensure containment if necessary. He activated the detonator, the light blinking red against his blood-soaked uniform. I hadn't even noticed he'd been wounded, a deep gash across his torso leaking blood with each labored breath. "Get to elevator," Kozlov ordered. "I finished this." Reeves understood immediately. Everyone pull back. Now! Baranov noticed the change in our strategy. He turned toward Kozlov, but was momentarily distracted when Reeves emptied his magazine into more containment tubes, creating a wall of blue flame between Baranov and our escape route. I helped Alvarez toward the elevator while Reeves covered our retreat. Kozlov remained behind, detonator clutched in his hand, charges secured to his body. "Kozlov," I called. "There has to be another way. No time for a better plan." He smiled grimly. "This is good death. Soldier's death." Baranov lunged toward us, cutting through the flames as if they were merely an inconvenience. Kozlov waited until the last possible moment, until Baranov was almost upon him. Then he rushed forward, tackling the changed colonel into the central containment hub, where the highest concentration of Agent G was stored. "For Russia," Kozlov said, his finger pressing the detonator. The explosion was blinding, a concentrated fireball that consumed the central hub in milliseconds. The pressure wave knocked us backward into the elevator as chain reactions ignited each connected container. Blue flames engulfed the chamber, feeding on the organic filaments, racing through the network Baranov had created. Reeves slammed the elevator control panel, the doors closing just as secondary explosions began. Alvarez leaned heavily against me, her breathing shallow, blood soaking through her uniform. "Facility's self-destruct system," she murmured. "Soviet failsafe for containment breach." A computerized voice confirmed her assessment, Russian announcements followed by a countdown blaring through the facility's speakers. The elevator surged upward, the shaft around us shuddering as explosions continued below. "We're not going to make it," I said, watching the floor indicators crawl past too slowly. "Yes, we are," Reeves replied with absolute certainty, checking Alvarez's wound. "Apply pressure here." I pressed against the bleeding as instructed while Reeves prepared his weapon for whatever might await us above. The elevator groaned, straining against mechanical failures as the facility began systematically destroying itself. When the doors finally opened on the ground level, we moved as quickly as Alvarez's injury allowed. The bunker was already collapsing, ceiling panels crashing down, support beams buckling under structural damage. Behind us, blue flames raced through conduits, consuming everything connected to Baranov's network. We stumbled out of the bunker entrance just as the final countdown ended. The ground beneath us heaved violently, throwing us forward into the snow. I covered Alvarez with my body as the bunker imploded, the entrance collapsing inward with a deafening roar. A shockwave of cold air rushed over us, carrying dust and debris. Then, silence. We lay in the snow, gasping for breath, our bodies outlined against the remains of the facility. Above us, the night sky was clear, stars shining brightly. No sign remained of Baranov, the Golem, or Agent G. Nothing but a collapsed crater where the bunker entrance had been. Reeves recovered first, checking Alvarez's wound before activating his emergency beacon. I rolled onto my back, looking up at the stars as my adrenaline slowly dropped. We had survived, but at what cost? Wong, Harris, Kozlov, Jenkins, and the others, all gone. And who could say for sure that Baranov's consciousness had truly been destroyed? The Siberian night was quiet around us. In the distance, a wolf howled, ordinary, natural, and untainted. That sound comforted me as we waited for extraction, 3 survivors in the snow. The extraction team found us at dawn. Their helicopters cut through the morning mist, rotors breaking the quiet that had surrounded us since the facility's collapse. I remained motionless in the snow, my body numb from both cold and mental shutdown. The Siberian forest around us seemed very peaceful after what we'd seen underground. None of us had spoken much during those long hours of waiting. Reeves had maintained a vigilant watch, keeping his weapon ready even though he was exhausted. Alvarez had drifted in and out of consciousness, her shoulder wound temporarily stabilized but needing proper medical attention. I'd simply stared at the sky, trying to convince myself that the nightmare was truly over. "Movement," Reeves announced as the first helicopter approached. His voice was raw, stripped of everything but essential function. I didn't react. Part of me wondered if it even mattered anymore. If Baranov's consciousness had somehow survived, if even a trace of Agent G remained intact, extraction might simply spread the infection. But I lacked the energy to voice these concerns. The medical team reached Alvarez first, their skilled movements very different from our stillness. I watched without emotion as they secured her to a stretcher, noticing how professional they were. When they approached me with thermal blankets and assessment questions, I responded mechanically, my voice not sounding like my own. "Any direct contact with biological agents?" a medic asked, checking my pupils with a penlight. "No," I said, though I wasn't entirely certain. Everything after the explosion blurred together in my memory. Reeves was the last to board, scanning the collapsed bunker entrance one final time before climbing into the helicopter. As we lifted off, the sunrise lit up the impact crater where Baranov and his creations had disappeared. From above, it looked almost small against the huge Siberian landscape. No visible evidence remained of the horrors beneath. The flight to the extraction point went by quickly. Military doctors worked on Alvarez while giving us all preliminary decontamination procedures. I saw Reeves speaking into a satellite phone, his face blank as he delivered what I thought was a preliminary report. I couldn't hear his words over the rotor noise, but his tight jaw and precise gestures told me he was sticking to basic facts, separating the parts of our mission that couldn't be easily explained. We were transferred to a medical transport plane at a remote airfield. The crew wore level 4 containment suits, treating us as potential biohazards even though we had initial clearance. Their caution made sense, but it was very disturbing. The plane's interior had been converted into an isolation unit, with separate compartments for each of us. "Where are we going?" I asked, as a doctor connected monitoring equipment to my arm. "Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany," she replied through her mask. "You'll undergo full quarantine and debriefing there." I nodded and leaned back on the gurney. Germany. Not American soil. I recognized the protocol. They wouldn't risk bringing us home until they were completely sure we carried no trace of Agent G. The next 2 months were filled with repetitive tests, interrogations, and psychological evaluations. We were housed in an isolation wing of the military hospital, our interactions limited to medical staff and intelligence officers. Blood tests, tissue samples, and brain scans. They monitored us for any sign of infection or neurological abnormalities. Each day brought the same set of questions from different interrogators, as if they hoped inconsistencies might emerge in our accounts. I saw Alvarez only during scheduled debriefing sessions. Her shoulder wound had been treated successfully, but she moved more carefully now, her previous confidence replaced by constant watchfulness. Reeves maintained his military bearing throughout, answering questions efficiently and without emotion. During the 6th week of quarantine, I was awakened by nightmares for the 3rd consecutive night. In my dreams, Baranov's blue-veined hand reached through my chest, his voice whispering about evolution and unified consciousness. I gasped awake to find myself clawing at my own skin. "The dreams are a normal trauma response," the staff psychologist told me the next morning. She sat across from me in the small interview room with her clipboard. "All 3 of you are exhibiting classic PTSD symptoms." "There's nothing classic about what we experienced," I replied. She made a note without looking up. "Have you considered that your recurring nightmare might represent feelings of violation? The boundary between self and other was literally threatened during your encounter." I nearly laughed at the clinical reduction of our experience. How could I explain that my fear wasn't symbolic? That somewhere in my hindbrain, I couldn't shake the possibility that Baranov's consciousness might find a way to persist, to reach out, to continue what he'd started? When clearance finally came, we were assembled in a conference room for our final briefing. A collection of senior military officers and intelligence officials waited around a long table. At the head sat a brigadier general, whose name tag identified him as Hargrove. "You've all been medically cleared," Hargrove began without preamble. No trace of biological contamination has been detected. However, the security classification of Operation Golem remains at Omega level. He slid folders across the table to each of us. Inside mine was a heavily redacted mission report and a non-disclosure agreement that covered several pages. The official record will show that a training accident during a joint U.S.-Russian military exercise resulted in the deaths of 9 American and 4 Russian personnel. Hargrove continued. The nature of Agent G and Colonel Baranov's research remains classified indefinitely. A training accident, Alvarez repeated, her voice flat with disbelief. 13 people died. An entire village was destroyed. Officially, Verkhoyansky remains an uninhabited location on Soviet maps, one of the intelligence officers interjected. The Russian government has agreed to maintain this position. You're hiding the truth, I said, anger finally breaking through my emotional shutdown. Hargrove's expression hardened. We're containing a threat, Dr. Jones. Public knowledge of Agent G would create panic and potentially inspire similar research by hostile actors. The best defense against biological weapons is often secrecy regarding their existence. I wanted to argue further, but the fatigue of the past 2 months had worn me down. Instead, I signed the papers, knowing refusal would likely result in indefinite observation for my own safety. As we prepared to leave, Reeves approached me in the hallway. His face showed subtle changes I hadn't noticed before. New lines around his eyes, a perpetual tension in his jaw. They're watching us, he said quietly. They'll always be watching us. Do you think it's really over? I asked. His expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. I think we did our job. The rest isn't our concern anymore. It was the answer of a soldier who'd learned to separate his thoughts, to accept that some questions didn't have satisfying answers. I envied his discipline, even as I felt sorry for what it cost him emotionally. We parted without ceremony. Reeves received orders for Pentagon intelligence along with a promotion to full colonel. Alvarez accepted a position with the World Health Organization's Biosecurity Division. I returned to DARPA, to my old lab and my old projects, as if nothing had changed. For 6 months, I tried to resume my previous life. I analyzed threat assessments, reviewed defensive countermeasure proposals, attended the same tedious budget meetings. But everything had changed. Each time I entered a lab, I saw Baranov's makeshift experiments. Each time I reviewed a biological agent report, I remembered the thing in the church. Hundreds of humans fused into a single organism, faces still conscious, still screaming. My resignation letter was brief. My supervisor accepted it with visible relief. I'd become a difficult presence, questioning protocols and research applications that previously wouldn't have troubled me. I transitioned to private consulting work, choosing projects that focused on medical applications rather than weapons development. The years passed. I learned to live with the nightmares, to see them as trauma effects rather than premonitions. I maintained sporadic contact with Alvarez, exchanging research papers and occasional conference calls that carefully avoided direct mention of Verkhoyansky. Reeves disappeared into the intelligence community. My attempts to reach him went unanswered. 15 years lessened my fears, though they never fully disappeared. When I received my cancer diagnosis 6 months ago, my first reaction was perverse relief. At least I would die a natural death, my consciousness wholly my own until the end. Is that why you're breaking your silence now? The journalist asked, pulling me back to the present moment. Because of your diagnosis? I studied my watered-down Scotch, aware of how my story must sound to someone who hadn't been there. Partly, when you know your time is limited, priorities change. The bar had emptied further during my account, the late hour clearing out all but the most dedicated drinkers. The journalist hadn't touched their drink since I'd begun describing our escape from the facility. You mentioned Dr. Alvarez contacted you recently, they prompted. I nodded, leaning forward slightly. Last month. After years of careful communication, she sent me an encrypted message that broke all our established protocols. She'd been working at a WHO monitoring station near the Kazakhstan-Russia border. Her team detected biological anomalies in soil and water samples, cellular structures that responded to proximity, that tried to connect even though they were separated. The journalist's expression remained neutral, professional, but I noticed their grip tighten slightly on their pen. She disappeared 3 days after sending that message. Official report says she abandoned her post, took accumulated leave without proper notification, but she sent me something before vanishing. I lowered my voice further. Classified documents suggesting Agent G was developed at multiple Soviet sites, not just Verkhoyansky. Baranov's facility was apparently one part of a larger program codenamed Soznani, Russian for consciousness. "And you believe these other development sites might still contain active samples?" the journalist asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "But the timing concerns me, especially given what happened to Reeves." "Lieutenant Colonel Reeves?" "Colonel Reeves," I corrected. "He was found dead in his apartment last week. Official report calls it suicide. Gunshot wound to the head." "You don't believe that?" I stared at my drink. Reeves was many things, but suicidal wasn't one of them. He was a survivor, a pragmatist, and he'd recently requested access to files related to Soviet bioweapon sites in Central Asia. The journalist remained silent, waiting for me to continue. "I can't prove anything," I said, "but the coincidences are troubling. Alvarez discovers anomalies, sends me classified information, and disappears. Reeves investigates similar leads, ends up dead." I reached into my jacket pocket and withdrew a small metal case. Inside was a flash drive, unmarked except for a small scratch on its surface. "This contains everything," I said, sliding it across the table. "My notes from Verkhoyansky, Alvarez's recent findings, copies of Reeves's file requests, and satellite imagery of the Kazakhstan sites Alvarez was monitoring." The journalist hesitated before taking it. "Why me? Why now?" "Because I'm not going to survive this cancer. Because everyone who witnessed what happened in that Siberian village is either dead or disappeared. Someone needs to know what's out there before all of us who remember are gone." I drained the last of my scotch, the watered-down alcohol barely registering on my palate. "The official records say Operation Golem ended in that collapsed bunker 15 years ago. Maybe it did. Maybe I'm just a dying man connecting unrelated dots." I met the journalist's eyes directly. "But if I'm right, what happened in Verkhoyansky was only the first chapter, and whatever's emerging now has had 15 years to evolve." The journalist carefully pocketed the flash drive. "I'll need to verify these claims independently. You understand that. I'd expect nothing less. But be careful who you contact. The people who covered up this story the first time are still in power." We finished our conversation shortly after. I paid the bill and watched the journalist leave, wondering if I'd just endangered another life by sharing what I knew. Outside the bar window, Washington continued its evening rhythms, unaware of the horror that might be returning half a world away. As I stood to leave, I caught my reflection in the mirror behind the bar. I looked gaunt, with prematurely gray hair and haunted eyes. Cancer had thinned me further, but the real deterioration had begun in that Siberian forest 15 years ago. I'd left something essential behind in that collapsed bunker, some fundamental faith in human nature and scientific purpose that could never be recovered. I walked out into the night air, breathing deeply even with the city pollution. Whatever happened next would unfold without me. I'd done what I could, shared what I knew with someone who might use it wisely. Whether anyone would believe it, whether anyone could stop what might be coming, was beyond my control now. The city lights blurred around me as I headed toward my hotel. Behind me, the bar's neon sign lit up the sidewalk with a faint blue glow, not so different from the luminescent blue that had pulsed through Baranov's veins. I quickened my pace, leaving the light behind, focusing on the solid concrete beneath my feet rather than the dark alleys around me.